Welcome, everybody. This is the fourth episode of the Port Angeles High School interview series, or the 36th episode of the Orchestra podcast. We have with us today Dr. David Wacyk, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Right.
He is the director of bands at St. Martin's University, if I have that correct. And he is here to talk to us today about, well, we'll find out. So would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about maybe what brought you to Washington in the first place? You sort of popped up out of nowhere.
That's exactly right.
And you seem to be all over the place on the forums that I keep track of, and it seems like you're doing some good work.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate being invited to do this. Right, my name is David Wacyk. I'm the director of bands at St. Martin's University, and I serve as assistant professor of music there, and I teach music theory also. And assistant professor just basically means I'm a young professor. So for anyone that doesn't realize what that means, assistant, associate, and then full professor usually is how it goes. And so I'm starting now my second year at St. Martin's. Which also means that it is the second year of the St. Martin's University Wind Ensemble and band program in general. So that sort of answers the question about how I showed up here. Because in 2019, I finished school, probably forever, and I graduated with my doctorate from University of Maryland. And my degree is in instrumental conducting. And at that point, my wife and I started looking for jobs, and my wonderful wife decided to approve the decision. When this job was offered, we made the tough choice to pick up and move. And one of the major reasons why it felt like a good idea to come out here was because St. Martin's gave me the opportunity to start a new instrumental music program. To their credit, they have been running a really successful jazz ensemble in the past. We have also had a pretty consistent pep band in the past, but they decided to really open it up to a full national search, and that's a big deal for an institution to say we want to add instrumental music as a full-time thing to our program. And so that just gave me a lot of hope, and it's not every day that you have an opportunity to start something from scratch, although it comes with its challenges. That's why I'm so interested in coming out here to do this.
Well, I think we all find ourselves right now in a similar situation of building, because this whole pandemic situation has taken even the most tried and true programs and it at least tipped them over the wastebasket, if not all the way down in them.
That's right.
And so I think everybody that I bring on the podcast has a unique perspective to bring, answering the question, how do we keep our programs growing?
Yeah.
And I'm in a pretty established position, and I don't think any of us have any one answer, but hopefully combining the many of them, we can find at least a little bit of truth in what works, and what's effective, what it isn't too risky. Because I feel like there's lots of sort of, broad-shouldered decisions that we could make, and especially the both of us being new to our positions. This is my second year at Port Angeles High School, and younger people, there is kind of the option there to just show up and be large and in charge, but so rarely does that go very well.
Right.
and I can't imagine what it would be like to be starting, a new program, and it's your program and you want to take it your direction, but you've kind of got to, draw inside the lines based on what your administration has given you.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
So more or less, what are your plans for the school year with all of the restrictions that we are under? And
Right.
Not placing blame on anybody there. We've just got to find a way forward based on the situation we're in.
Yeah, and you're right that every I think as we realize, I think when this whole thing started, you can go back as far as you want to, but April, May, June, and then planning for the new year, our inclination as a society is sort of to brush with broad strokes and say, all choir needs to go away, right? All wind ensemble, all orchestra activities need to go away, or even to like label it like choir is the most dangerous, then wind ensembles, then orchestras are okay because they don't breathe for some reason, So there's, but I think what we all realized quickly is that you have to go in with a scalpel instead, or I don't know, to carry the metaphor, with a 0.5 lead or something instead of broad strokes, because every school district is going to have a different approach to it, right? Every university is going to have a different approach, and we can certainly learn from each other, but for instance, St. Martin's decided to hold in-person classes this fall up until Thanksgiving. And so then we're going to be, after Thanksgiving, we're going to be online. And that made sense for a college campus our size and of our makeup, because we have a lot of students from different states. And so to send students away for the holiday and then to bring them all back in seemed like a risk. And it's one that I sort of, it's an idea that I agree with. It's probably a better move just to say, stay home, we'll do finals, remotely. So the good part of that is based on the decision that my university has made, we are trying our best to go through with some type of in-person ensemble. And I give the university credit for allowing my colleagues and myself a little bit of freedom to try to figure out what that's going to look like. No one asked me, no one specifically told me that I need to have in-person ensembles, right? And that's good too. So again, just going back to the idea that we're all in a unique situation, and we can afford ourselves and our colleagues some leeway when it comes to what we all decide to do for our individual programs.
Well, and to give the kids watching some insight, even back in the spring between the school districts, whether or not the teachers were allowed to go into their offices, into their classrooms, was really kind of a toss-up between different districts. I was one of few orchestra teachers in the state who could actually go into the office on a somewhat daily basis and get work done with all of my music and books and everything that I have, rather than the half-hour mad dash that some people got to get what they need and go home. And I'm lucky enough to have the harpsichord behind me, and in times of trouble, Bach speaks to me, even though the song has a mother something.
Yes.
And to be able to really be in my classroom and think about what is possible with the classroom in front of me. And Port Angeles has some pretty big, orchestra numbers, and even, best case scenario of a hybrid in-person situation with 15 people in a class on an A and B schedule. Some of my larger classes that wouldn't even work for. And so those of us in that situation with large classes, because for the last 10, 15 years, and this is not unique to my school district or my school, and I'm sure if you haven't experienced it, you're aware of it, the way that school districts pressure music teachers, ensemble teachers, to keep their class sizes huge.
Right.
In order to stay in one building, in order to keep the chamber class with 16 people in it. Yep. So we've been under this pressure for almost 2 decades to keep our classes at like 70 or 80 kids before they'll split it into 2 classes of 40. And now we've pushed ourselves to the point where we can't, have any classes at all.
Yeah, right.
So anyhow.
But that's fun.
Yeah, very fun. The solution that I've sort of come up with, and we're still waiting for, final word on it, is investigate what remote possibilities there are. And, there's rumors going around that Zoom has solved the latency problem, or, another app. And their Upbeat app seems to be the whatever the rumors are, seems to be the most effective for kind of taking what the acapella app is, but doing it sort of in a live session. And they have a waiting room where the rest of the class can watch the rehearsal, because you can only have 16 people in the buffering, like.
Right, and that's for the paid version too, I think. Yeah, I think I just saw this the other day. Yeah.
But so if we can get that, great. But if not, we're going to put kids in cohorts of 5, which works great for string orchestra because that's 2 violins, viola, cello, bass, and maybe have a teacher fill in here and there when the number doesn't quite work out. And if we're up here in Clallam County, we're still in phase 2, so we can only have 5. If we go to phase 3 and we can have 10 people, great. And as far as I understand it, I think we're going to start performances on the band side with percussionists first, because they sort of present the least risk. But I'm sure you've seen the covers that they're selling for the ends of clarinets and trumpets.
Yeah. So that's what we're using. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So we are, I think it became clear that the plan wasn't going to change, right, by a few weeks leading up to our first day of classes, which was August 31st. And so based on, I'm sure, the same research that you and all other teachers have been I'm sure you've talked about a lot on this program, from CBDNA, College Band Directors Association. We're using pantyhose material, 2 layers of it over each bell that has a bell, each instrument that has a bell. And they're also playing through masks. And so we use a face mask with a slit cut in it, and it's actually an overlapping mask. And that's to trap the aerosols escaping from the nose when wind plays.
Yeah.
So it's not comfortable. And actually, the bell covers, they affect, of course, tone, right? But also intonation. And so we've had 2 rehearsals now, and I have to give it my students some credit, because they keep saying, Dr. Wacyk, we knew what we were getting into. We know it's hard. It's not a big deal, because I have a tendency to be pretty apologetic about it. But so they're doing a good job, but it's a little uncomfortable. It's just hot and hard to play a wind instrument with a mask on. And so we've had to make quite a few adjustments, but if it makes it possible, then we're happy to try it.
Yeah, well, it's a similar situation. Might be your radiator's running hot and your timing belt is squealing, and you're in Arizona, but you've got to get back to Billings, Montana by Saturday.
Yeah.
And so you drive a little slower and you stop more often. You just do what you have to do to get to the final destination.
That's exactly right. And we also, and we can talk about this a lot, but to really answer your question, like, what are we doing this semester? We are playing our instruments. And I keep telling my students, my goal is not a concert. So we are going to try to do some type of performance. We have some beautiful forested areas on our campus, and so we're going to try to go outside mid-October if the weather permits, and we'll try to just play some music. And they have a folder full of 5 or 6 pieces that I spent all summer trying to figure out and try to find, right? A lot of flexible instrumentation stuff. And I keep coming back to this idea that our goal shouldn't be any kind of performance. Our goal has to be the process. And I'm sure you say that to your students a lot too. The goal is that we come together weekly and we play beautiful music. And I've, as an instructor, as an educator, it's really important that I think that we tap the brakes and like you're saying, just slow down, because the goal no longer is a performance. So then we have to ask ourselves, what is the goal? And
a lot of the things that we could focus on are some of the things that especially high school students enjoy the least, like focusing on music theory or scales or Yeah, I'm sure my band colleague Jarrett Hansen will say, long tones,
You're right. Yeah.
or taking out the junior all-state packet because it can be played as a group, and have everyone turn off their microphones and the teacher plays their
Right.
part, and hopefully everyone at home is playing along with us. Um, and it's just we do what we're able to do with the hand that we're dealt. The piece that I'm most worried about, and hopefully you can speak to, is that I think the majority of our students, uh, especially in public schools, are here to make music with each other.
Hmm.
And at least right now, that piece is difficult. The social emotional element, which is sort of most important in a crisis situation, is sort of the element that we are least able to serve when we can't meet in person.
Right.
Now, you're lucky that you can have students together, but I'm sure it's to a lesser extent, and possibly less frequently.
It
And
is. Yeah. Yeah. So
so,
we are doing. I mean, we can really only rehearse in an enclosed space for about 30 minutes before we
mhm,
have to move on to something different. And I'm sure, I mean, they haven't told me this yet, but they're upwards of 10 feet apart, just because I feel like we need to go beyond what's suggested. And so I'm
mhm,
sure they're not sitting back there, talking their heads off because they just can't, and
mhm.
so the social element probably is just not there. And
So
so
what?
we've been
Go ahead.
talking about this quite a bit,
Mhm.
and and it's difficult, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. And I'm still getting to know my students. I mean, this was
Yeah.
supposed to be my second year, right, where we finally have this back and forth, and there's not so much of a rush to get to the finish line.
Mhm.
Um, but so that's another goal of mine, is just, again, tap the brakes, slow down, and maybe let's have some more conversation, since that is safer to do. um, but right, so your students, high school students, college students, they're all the same. My students participate in wind ensemble largely because of the feeling they got when they were a high school musician.
Mhm.
So, at St. Martin's, we're building up our music major and music minor cohort, but it's still pretty small. And so the bulk of the instrumentalists on campus are here just to play, because they like playing and they like the social element of being in wind ensemble.
And it's important for the students watching that that's more or less the case at any
Yes.
institution. That the bulk of your music department is going to be non-majors, unless you're going, to like Indiana or the Cincinnati
Right.
Conservatory of Music. It's pretty rare that the majority is music majors.
Absolutely. And that's, and just personal opinion, that is likely going to just continue on that path. And I think college band and orchestra and choir programs are just going to continue to be more and more non-major based. And so for your students, and for all younger students that are looking into a college system, come and be in the ensembles, because we exist for you, not just for the majors and the minors. We are here to serve, all students. And so it's
Well,
really
and
important, because
as
I
things
think.
like SAT scores become less important,
Mhm.
they want to see not just that you've pursued some kind of extracurricular activity, but that it's an activity that shows discipline, and that when they look at your transcript, they see 4 years of band.
Mhm.
And hopefully, if they've included the arts department chair or the whoever's in charge of music at your institution, they're probably going to recognize, Jazz One or
Right.
Wind Ensemble, or that you that senior year you made it into that top auditioned ensemble, and see that you have that dedication to see something through, which will apply to your biology major, your nursing major, engineering major, whatever it is. And music continues to be sort of the number one separating factor for students applying to like pre-med programs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you're exactly right. And I know that even beyond that, like especially my institution, a lot of smaller colleges are dependent on student service and student volunteerism. And so, we look really fondly. I mean, my students, a lot of them are also participate in the pep band, and so that is, I see it anyways, as service to the university, because, and service to their fellow classmates, because they are using their talents to help the university. And so we see it that way as well. So and that's a really important element of, when we see student musicians, we know that they are dedicated and hardworking, and likely are in it for the long haul. And that's what universities are really looking for. So yeah.
And before we say goodbye to the kids, I want to say this as carefully as I can, that I think if you're a person who's considering whether or not it's worth it to stay in music this year, think about all of the peers, not that they're counting on you or depending on you to be there in that rehearsal, but that's one fewer face that they enjoyed seeing in class.
That's right. And to bring it back to the social element of like why students decide to be in an ensemble, and if that social element doesn't appear to be there, maybe I'll just leave my ensemble and go take care of my science class I have to take, and I'll come back to orchestra later on. And you and I and teachers, we hear that, and we understand that is one way to go. But I guess what I would say is, it's really common. All teachers know that when you decide to put an instrument down, it's very difficult to pick it back up again, because it's a skill that we all work really hard on, and putting it down, even if you think it's for a little bit, may become a detriment in the future for you trying to come and bring back that skill into your mind. So that's just one thing, but also socially, people are depending on individuals. When you're in an ensemble, especially orchestra, it's like the fifth, second violin. It's easy to feel like if I leave, or if I don't show up today, or if I don't show up this semester, I will not be missed. And that is absolutely
almost always the person that the four people surrounding them were depending on to play confidently.
Right. That's exactly right. And we are, as ensemble members, we are stronger in numbers, but also individuals matter to those numbers. And so love your section, love your ensemble, stick around. And also the last thing I'll say about that is we are in the business of learning music and learning how to be a musician. And absolutely that will happen whether you have an instrument in your hands or not. You do need to be with the people that have the same musical goal as you. And so 3-4 months without doing a whole lot of playing with other people, there's still a huge opportunity to grow as a musician during that time, because we're able to tap on the brakes and really think about what's important to your development as a musician.
And even though the social element is kind of the hardest to facilitate right now, it's also the one thing that we for sure can do.
Yep.
Because we can't necessarily rehearse in person the way that we used to, or have concerts the way that we used to. But we can have meetings like this between you and I, or between a whole class, and we can see each other's faces, and we can communicate, and we can hold that space that we would have had in the classroom.
That's right.
And stay connected.
And I would also suggest that if a student that's considering not being a part of orchestra this year really thinks about, why have I been in orchestra leading up to this point? Oh, well, it's because I get to sit next to Jane, and she's my best friend. That's great, but I would also suggest that remember performances, remember rehearsals, and it's not pure social interaction is fine, but you can do that in any capacity. I would also suggest that maybe that person, what makes that relationship enriched is the fact that you're doing a common goal, right? You're geared towards a performance and a rehearsal of good music, and you're trying to be better. What you say in between, when Mr. Rodell's not watching, that's fun also, but your goal is to be there and make music. So continue to do that. And when we come back, because you're a better musician, that collective music making will be a much better social environment.
And again, I've said this in all of our interview series for the students, is that the silver lining here is we can bring in, excellent, like highly accredited individuals like Dr. Wacyk here to come and talk with Mr. Hansen, our new band teacher students, and bring in a new voice with real experience and pedigree to just talk to one instrument group alone. I mean, we don't have time for that in a regular rehearsal. And
Right.
you're a trumpeter, yes?
I am, yeah.
So to speak just to the trumpet players, and Mr. Hansen is a French horn player and certainly a competent band teacher. I bet he can play trumpet just fine, the way that I can play cello, even though I'm really a violinist.
Right.
But to have somebody with decades of experience on that instrument come in is really special, and that's something we don't have in the regular rehearsal scenario because we're so focused on that concert goal.
That's right, and people like me are eager to get out and speak to folks, especially now when we're missing, for ourselves, teachers also are missing that interaction, and students shouldn't be mistaken that we of course are missing that interaction, and that's why we want them around. But that's why folks like me are trying to get out into the communities any way we can, to say we're all still here, we all still want to do this. Let's just pause for a second and think about what's really valuable, and then we'll be in a better place.
Keep in mind that the end is in sight. Right. We might need a microscope to see it, but it's out there somewhere. Right. And if we can just survive this time together, whatever it is that we end up doing in the interim, we're going to do our best to provide some kind of experience that nurtures students' musicality and your social emotional well-being through the power of music. And that's going to look different than normal, but we will get to the other end of this tunnel at some point. And we've just got to have faith that the end is coming at some point.
That's exactly right. And so then the question is, what do we want when it ends? When we come back together, what is it that we're going to be hungry for and ready to do?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's enough for the students who will be watching. So let's go ahead and say goodbye to the students.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you in person real soon.
And I'm going to do a pause restart just so I can do the Disney Studio magic a little bit.
Okay.
All right, and we're back for those of you who are still watching. If students are still watching, great. I love the nerds out there who just want to hear the whole conversation. I was certainly one of those kids who sat on my MacBook back in the day with the turquoise plastic shell back, if you can remember those.
Oh, yes.
And Wikipedia was a new thing, and I would sit there and just look up composers and why they wrote which symphony and then listen to the symphony because YouTube was also quite new. But some European genius, bless their hearts, had put up all of those old Bernstein recordings of the Sibelius and Mahler and Beethoven symphonies with the Vienna Phil that he did.
That's right. I was the nerd laying on my bed at any point in the day or night listening with headphones to the Canadian brass.
They're not so bad.
Their Bach transcriptions were something I had on heavy rotation. So yeah, our field is populated with nerds, and that's glorious.
Well, and I had it's a long story, but I had the chance once to share a couple of adult beverages with Jens Lindemann.
Oh, wow.
And I can tell you for certain that of all of the famous top brass, if you'll pardon the pun, musicians out there that I've met, eccentricity seems to be hand in hand with that caliber of musicianship.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They have to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But to that point, and I think you'll have some insight here, is I've had a couple of friends who would have had an opportunity to study with, Jens Lindemann in particular, or somebody equivalent in the string world. But the number of actual lessons that they got from that person was very few over the course of their what's the word I'm looking for? Academic career.
Right.
And I went through that decision myself when I was choosing where to go to school. And I had already been taking lessons with Dr. Sven Ronning at Pacific Lutheran University while I was in high school. and had a lesson with a couple of the teachers at Northwestern. And at that point, I was thinking composition, not necessarily teaching or performance or conducting. And had a lesson with Ken Goldsmith down at Rice. He's since retired. But all of those experiences were really just, I was just another student to them.
Right.
You know, I wasn't this person that they were going to invest in.
Yep.
And when I had a lesson sort of more or less that same time frame with Dr. Ronning at PLU, he encouraged me to go to the school where I was going to get the most attention.
That's really good advice.
And not just the most attention, but the best education.
Sure.
And I think part of that is where you're going to get the most opportunities.
Yep.
And if you're a, you know, hotshot clarinet player at your high school, you know, probably unlikely that you're still going to be hotshot clarinet player at any college you go to, even the smallest one. There's going to be at least 3 or 4 other, you know, clarinet players who are the hotshot clarinet player at their high school. It's just, it's a bigger, you know, you were in a fish tank and now you're in the ocean. There's just
exactly
more
right.
fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so going somewhere where you're really going to get the investment from your teachers is so important when our students are looking at schools.
Right.
And I know at least the senior class I had last year, it was at least a part of their decision that the studio faculty, as part of the music department at the school they were applying to, was going to support them in that kind of way, and not just be, you know, a big name person that maybe will come in and do 2 or 3 of your lessons, but you get a grad student for, you know, 8 or 9 of them.
Yep.
Which, and no offense to that system, I, you know, as somebody who is still hopefully someday looking for a grad program in conducting, you know, I want that opportunity to have that, you know, TA-ship.
Right.
And that's an important part of being a grad student. But if you can get that investment from your teacher, even if you still have the theory class taught by the TA,
right.
That just, it makes it a better, more holistic experience for you, no matter where your degree comes from.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think, you know, I think students, high school students, and we as teachers, you know, we need to do a better job of educating our students about what a music experience at a college might be or can be, right? Because let's just say students that want to be music majors, and you're exactly right that they need to decide what kind of experience they want. I mean, if you have a top-notch clarinetist who has the goal of being a top-notch clarinetist at a very large university, then that's great. Then they know what they want and they know where they need to go to get it in any given state, right? You know which institutions are there for you, and if you can get in, then go and do that, and just know you're going to be
that's the important.
You're going to have to prove
be disappointed yourself once you get there,
right,
that you're not the only hotshot clarinet player.
Right. Just don't be disappointed.
If you're a fight to the top of the heap kind of person, it's going to work out just fine for you.
That's right. And there's always a chance that you may not get to the top of that heap, and you have to be okay with that, because there will be other heaps, right? But the problem comes when you have a student that just kind of stops short of that decision-making process and says, I just want to be a music major. I mean, I know that was my situation, right? I mean, in most of the points in my musical career, I haven't really thought it through beyond the big goal, right? I want to get into music school. Well, now I'm going to get a degree in music education, and at that point, I had an idea of what kind of work I wanted to do. You know, and then after that, it was I'm gonna get a master's degree in conducting. But I didn't really think about what that was going to lead to, and it led to me going back to public school and teaching, and that was wonderful. And then I decided I'm gonna, you know, it's just it's really important in this day and age to have enough information about what the future could hold for a potential music student, and it's not, it might not be enough anymore. I think we're selling our students short by saying, I think you could be a really good music major. because that that is great, and that's a good goal to have because it's a big goal. It takes a lot of work to practice and do all the things that's necessary, all the honor ensembles, and then finally get into a college. That's a big thing to do. But we also have to have some idea of what are you going to do. What do you want to be at that university, right? And so if you can get an answer to that, if the students know what the possibilities are, like you said, you can go to a big school and you can try to climb that heap. You can go to a small or medium-sized school, be valued as a clarinetist right away and continue to grow as a musician also. Maybe that sounds better to some students. And it all just depends on the personality of the student and how, students need to know themselves, like how will you succeed? For me, I was happy to be to be unknown in the bottom of a trumpet section. Like, so I went to Interlaken for a couple summers.
Okay.
And I don't think they do it. What's that?
That's no small feat.
No, well, and I'm from Michigan, so it was a little easier because it was just a 5-hour.
Yeah.
Right. But my first year there, so I don't think they do it anymore. I don't know, maybe they do, but they did chair challenges, right? So for those that don't know, right, it's you audition to a certain chair, but then every week you have to prove that you can go higher and higher, and it's very tense situation. But I think I thrive in those kind of situations because it allows me the space to say, okay, no one knows me. I'm just this third trumpet, and let's see what I can do, right? And I don't have to put that much pressure on myself. And all of a sudden, I start to shoot up. And so for me, I enjoy being at a larger state school and just trying to like sort of sneak my way up to as far as I can go. But I've dealt with a lot of students, especially at St. Martin's and then a little bit at Towson at University of Maryland, that thrive more in a situation where they know they're making a difference right away, that they know that they can be in the middle or maybe even at the top of a section, and they've shown so much leadership in their high school, and that's what they want. That's the experience they want in their college career.
And the only reason that I caution students away from the climb to the top of the heap schools is that once you get to the top of the heap, if you even for a moment think, is this what I want to be doing with my life? And I've seen it happen too many times with friends of mine that were top of the heap kind of people and went to schools where they climbed all the hurdles and jumped through all the hoops. And maybe only one of them is still at it, in making a career as a performer.
Right.
But the rest of them have sort of figured out a different pathway altogether. And I'm sure the education that they got are serving them, but a lot of the places they ended up didn't require the struggles and the straight up suffering that they went through.
Right.
And they could have gone to a school where they would have been, a little more nurtured and asked the question, what do you want to do after this?
Right.
How can I help you achieve your goals? Not, here's the tempo marking for the etude book that you're going to hit by the end of the semester.
That's right. That's right.
And that might make good musicianship, but it doesn't necessarily make a good human.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think, that's really a good point. And, I mentioned earlier that, at high school teachers could maybe do a better job of counseling their potential music students about what kind of experience they want at the college level. Similarly, college directors, music professors need to do a better job of career counseling from day one to graduation. Because I know for myself in my undergrad, and probably for you too, it was basically two options. It was, great, you can try to climb to the top of the heap and be a professional performer, right? Or you can be an educator. And there's this, historically been this sad stigma that if you can't perform, then you should probably teach, right?
And to that point, I was a big part of the change at Pacific Lutheran University while I was there with Dr. Ed Powell, of changing the way that the jury structure worked. so that no matter what music major you were, your sophomore jury was a performance.
That's great.
Because if you can't play your instrument well, I don't have a lot of faith that you can tell other people how to play their instrument well.
That's right. And that is the ultimate goal. Is this is so important to me, and I think to a lot of people. We are teaching musicianship, right? Just like we were talking about in the midst of this pandemic, when we can't play your instrument, what are we supposed to do? We teach music, and that's more than notes on a page. And so, excuse me, we have to have more of an eye on building musicians. And so for a music major, whether they're ed or music performance, or maybe a Bachelor of Arts in music, maybe a music minor, maybe it's someone that wants to major in music, then go on and do something I never existed, which is like a master's in business, right? Music business, music administration.
Yeah.
There's a whole ton of nonprofits out there that are now requiring some type of degree in music administration. And so what does that mean? Well, if you're going to go and do that, don't we want, I mean, if I were the music director of a professional orchestra, I would want everyone running my organization to be a good musician and to understand what it takes to run a really good musical institution. And so
and you can see the orchestras doing well right now that are surviving, that are still making content. The up and down from, the top brass administrator all the way to the, 8th chair violist all have music degrees, every single one of them.
That's right.
And certainly there are places doing furloughs and layoffs just because of income, and there's nothing that anybody could have done about that. But the people who are the most creative, who are managing to put out some content despite all of this, are the people who have those music-minded people on their staff, and not the, cutthroat shark, business major CEOs that are, looking to turn a profit. And that's why, like an orchestra like Berlin is a philharmonic and not a symphony. And maybe not everybody knows that distinction. Is basically a symphony is for profit and a philharmonic is a non-profit, more or less.
Yeah.
And usually a philharmonic has more of a collaborative component, that the orchestra members vote on a lot of the decisions. And so when you look at the orchestras around the world, the symphonies that are really trying to keep those profit margins wide are not doing so well compared to some of the musician-centered groups. And despite the fact that Seattle Symphony is a symphony, I can attest with the connections that I have with that particular orchestra that pretty much everybody they employ has a degree in music. And they're thinking not just about, how can we keep the numbers in the black, but how can we serve the people that we employ and further our community. Seattle Symphony just started putting out new performances of quartets, more or less the same plan that we're hoping to put forward here in Port Angeles, to keep the music going. Because as much as the musicians that they employ need a job, our community needs music. I mean, Seattle, you can't throw a rock and miss like a community orchestra.
Right.
They're everywhere. And
I know, that's one thing I learned when I moved out here. Man, there are so many.
They are everywhere. And that speaks to the importance of music, no matter, regardless of the major that you get in college, is that music is going to continue to be something important in your life.
Right. Yeah. And so, as I'm just sort of entering this career in academia, because I had a whole career as a public school director also, I'm constantly reevaluating my own understanding of why students want to pursue music at the collegiate level. And I don't have any answers yet, except that I know that I've got a bunch of students who just love playing their instrument, and maybe they're not really keen to think much beyond that, and that's okay. So then my job is, for those students, my job is the same as a student that comes into the university and says, I want to be a music major and I want to be a professional music educator, right? So my job for both of those categories of student, the professional that want to be professional and the just, I want to play my clarinet today, right?
Yeah.
My job is the same for those. And that is, let's try to collectively become the best musicians that we can be. And
one of my all-time favorite quotes from a music teacher, and composer and teacher Bob Phillips says, "Teach the student in front of you."
Yeah.
Because you're going to have at any high school, college, they're going to have different aspirations.
Yep.
And those aspirations will likely change throughout the course of their time with you. And finding a way to teach them at whatever stage they are in their own personal development. The music just happens to be the medium through which we speak to them. But the point is to help them grow and develop in whatever direction they want to. I mean, the same way that, flowers turn towards the direction of the sun as the seasons change, that we have to change, what direction we take with our teaching methods. If we kind of back up to those hardcore private studio teachers at the top-notch music schools, they're not teaching you. They're teaching the perfect student.
Right, because they can't.
If you can't fit yourself into that cookie cutter mold, you're not going to make it with them. And like we said, if that's what you aspire to be, then go ahead, squeeze yourself into, the tight-fitting jacket that is. But there's another way that provides a path to equally great musical success that doesn't involve the self-deprecation,
right, and that's
self-torture.
that's definitely an old school approach, right? But the reason why it might sound like we're picking on the largest, best institutions is just because those are the ones that will typically be the slowest to change. They're gonna change. It's just a matter of time. I mean, we see it from the small colleges right now, that we are having to be really creative in the way we approach, I mean, pandemic aside, excuse me, the way we approach music making as an ensemble, because we don't have full ensemble all the time at smaller institutions. So we have to be creative about that. We have to be creative about our studio instructors have to be creative. They have to see the one individual student that they have, right?
And what a better time to totally challenge the model, whatever that means for you. I'm blessed and honored to serve on the NAFME National Orchestra Council.
Yeah.
And one of the members, Sarah Gulish, I think is her name, she teaches somewhere in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
She is a winds person who came into a strings position and looked at, doing things sort of the Western musician. We sit, in the arc and we play Mozart. And that was just not going to work for the students in front of her. So she kind of flipped the classroom. What do you guys want to do? And I think they play a lot of music that they themselves create, or music that they've arranged based on the music that inspires them. And not everybody has to do that, but I think everybody right now has an opportunity to look at and reevaluate the way that they do things. That's and find a way to serve, every student where they are and meet them where they are, rather than force them through, square peg through round hole.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that that this pandemic has forced a lot of institutions to reevaluate just fundamentally, right? What does it mean to teach music? What we all want to be a part of an ensemble. We all want ensembles in front of us, but if we have now the opportunity to really change things up, what are the barriers to us doing that? And usually it's just us. The fact that I still want to be able to look at a symphony score and study it and then perform it, right? And I don't think you or I would suggest that we do away with that. I mean, I think there are some people who are ready to, blow up the system completely and start over, and that's fine. We may need a little bit of that, but for me, it's been an interesting thing. I came into St. Martin's with specifically tasked to create the largest band program that I could, or at least that's the task I gave myself, because that's, I was hired to be a band director. But my lifeblood typically is chamber music, or large conducted chamber music, but like that's what I really love. And so I always wrestle with myself, like, well, am I going to try to build the biggest band program, wind and percussion program that I can? Yes, the answer is yes, but also I really believe in some of the smaller ensemble rep. And so how do we fit that? How do we do both? And so this,
Exactly. And I feel the same way about, the call for more representation in our repertoire for especially women and people of color.
Yep.
It doesn't mean burn your Beethoven.
Right.
It means go out and add to your shelf.
Yep.
So if all your shelf has on it is Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms and Tchaikovsky, we need some Florence Price. But more importantly, we need names that nobody's even heard of.
Right.
One of my first podcasts with Dr. Anna Edwards, we were talking about the scores that are just sitting in the New York Public Library that have never been performed.
Yeah.
I mean, handwritten scores by, certainly many of them by women, many of them by people of color, that just haven't had the love or the time of day to get published or edited or performed.
Yep.
And maybe not all of it is going to beat Beethoven 5, and that's fine. But I feel we owe the entirety of the music repertoire a kind of a refresh.
We do, and also it doesn't have to be Beethoven 5, right? Because we already have that.
Yeah, exactly.
and so why wouldn't we want to go see something? Now I'm just as culpable as the next person, and I get my big glossy Chicago Symphony Orchestra booklet, in the mail, and I look through their program and I say, well, I don't know that. Hey, I'll go to that one. Like we all do that, but why not put Beethoven 5 as the staple that it should be, and put it up on a pedestal and surround it with the rest of the program being new, interesting, unheard, underrepresented music, right? That doesn't take away from Beethoven.
Exactly to that point, when Ludovic Merlot was still at the helm at Seattle Symphony, he started this Untitled series. I don't know if you were aware of that. Yep. And I was lucky enough to be asked to turn pages for pianist at those.
Nice. Oh, I hate that job. But
and so I happened to be a part of the organ studio at PLU, and so I was sort of primo organ console assistant, which translates really well to, if I don't have to pull stops and play notes, just turning pages is a lot easier.
Just a side note, I turned pages in a performance of Berg's chamber concerto. And,
oh, geez.
Yeah, and so that's like my claim to fame for turning pages, but that's another thing.
Well, so my first time turning pages was for the Untitled series, and it was for a night of Soviet minimalist music.
Nice.
And what's the pianist's name? Alexei Lubomov was the pianist that they had brought in. And many of the Seattle Symphony musicians are more or less refugees of the Soviet Union. And mostly those people are who played on that concert. Okay. And one of the pieces in particular had been inspired by Alexei Lubomov bringing illegally a copy of Terry Riley's In C back into the Soviet Union. He had smuggled it in. And Rabinovich Barakovsky is the composer, and I think Récit des Voyages, because they were still sort of doing the French thing, is the name of the piece. And if all you've heard is Beethoven and Dvorak, I mean, it's really kind of painful stuff to listen to. But turning pages and getting to be backstage with these people and hearing the story the way it was presented, that it's not about making it sound pretty, because like the whole of 18th century choral music is about trying to sound like the gates of heaven. And if that's the only thing that music can sound like for you, then your perspective is fairly limited. This music was trying to express some really challenging emotions and a really challenging experience of an entire culture.
Yeah, right.
Seeing it through
And
that lens, I can really appreciate it.
right. Of course, yeah. Any music deserves a lens that we can, or a screen that we can listen to it through, right? And
Mhm.
even Beethoven 5, how much more would we appreciate? All that sounds nice. That piece deserves more than our opinion that it just sounds nice. And
Well, and pieces that aren't Beethoven 5 aren't made better by being compared to Beethoven 5.
exactly. That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't I think we're veering off topic, but I'll say it anyways. I don't know. Have you ever read Nicholas Slaminsky's what is it? It's a musical invective, that something of the musical invective, and it's basically, I should probably look it up before we end tonight, but it's basically, he compiled a bunch of critics reviews, music critics reviews from 19th century and on, and Beethoven 5 is one of them, and the critic is just talking about how terrible it is. And like, and it's just so good. And actually, when I was at Maryland, I had the opportunity, this is amazing, to conduct Verez's Integral. And
Oh, yeah,
and so, in my
not
whole,
exactly an earworm.
exact right. And it was right around that time that I discovered Slaminsky's book, this
Mhm.
compiling of critiques, and so in the concert I projected this critique, and I didn't say it was regarding Beethoven, but it made it sound like it was a critique of Perez's music, like, oh, sounds like trash, this is never this symphony, this piece is never going to go anywhere. And then in the projection, I quoted it for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and it was so important to me. It really dawned on me in my discovery of this music, this avant-garde music, that all music is at one point thought of as modern, thought of as new,
Mhm.
and at that time, just like we should expect ourselves of today, that music deserved a fair shake, right? And so, going back to your thought of all these composers these pieces sitting in the New York Library, they all of these works deserve a hearing, and
Mhm.
especially today, we have no reason. We have so many ensembles, right?
Yeah.
And we have no reason why, other than the fact that we're just concerned that, I don't know, people won't like us anymore if we play this music or something. It kind of defies logic. But I think we are in a position where we have a duty to resurrect that music. Um,
Mm.
and so, that's, my dissertation was on a composer named Ida Gutkovsky, and
Mm.
sort of an unknown composer, at least in my circles, of lots of music: orchestral music, choral music, wind music, French from the middle part of the 20th century, and it just, the fact that she's a woman didn't escape me when I was choosing a topic. And for me, it's the same thing. It's like I definitely need to know, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony better. Like, I should open up the score and I should spend more time with it, and I will do that. But
Mhm.
I also owe it to myself and to my colleagues and to any student that I might have in the future, to dive into scores that I have not yet been taught. It's okay for me to go and be my own teacher and figure these things out and educate myself so that I can better serve whoever I'm working with.
And I think it was like the one time that Philip Glass held a master class, which he does so rarely, and he doesn't really take students. And I think to this day he makes more money from his plumbing business than he does from his compositions. Uh, is that he a student asked, how do we orchestrate better, and his answer was, open up a score of a whatever composer you most admire and just write it down,
Right.
just like totally transcribe it, and you'll figure out everything that you love about the way that your favorite composer orchestrates.
Yep.
And I there's no trick that I can teach you about the way that I orchestrate. And he was really saying, and I appreciate about this about him, And he's sort of a subdued person. If you've never, go on YouTube and watch some videos of Philip Glass talking, because it's really quite funny for how well known a composer he is.
Yeah.
Is the humility of it is that I am not the gatekeeper on composition because I'm the new popular composer in town.
Right.
People have been doing this forever, and there were 30 other Mozarts while Mozart was alive that just didn't get published.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. That's exactly right. And also, that doesn't take away from Mozart.
No, not at all.
Mozart was genius. His music. I was just listening to, I don't know what it was, some piano sonata, and just like the middle slow movement was just. I mean, it's just his. Mozart's slow music is amazing, and it's all operatic. It's all opera. His slow music is all wonderful. But me liking somebody else does not mean I don't also like Mozart. And we keep coming back to that, but it's so important for myself to remind myself of, and for other people to hear. No one is the gatekeeper of anything, and it's okay to listen to, and it's okay to like, music from a classical symphony that is not Mozart, right? It's not going to take away from anything. And actually, what's the worst that will happen? You will hear this, you'll decide you don't like it, and then you'll be reminded how great Mozart really was.
Well, in the era of apps like Spotify and Pandora, where we just sort of, binge watch the history of music, if we can sneak into the playlist things that aren't Mozart and aren't Beethoven, the worst thing that happens to you is you spend, 4, 10, if you're listening to a whole symphony, that's kind of an investment, but just a movement. And so many times I've been on, driving in the car, and I just have the shuffle playlist on, and I hear something is like, wow, that's really great. Is that Mozart? And I look, and it's somebody else, like Franz Berval or something. And,
right.
And then I have to look that person up and find out who they are, and turns out they wrote a bunch of other stuff, and maybe that turns me on to a piece of music that I might actually want to program with my students.
Right.
Because realistically, Mozart did not write a ton for high school age string orchestra, nor did he write very much for high school age band. Right. That unarranged original. I mean, he didn't do a lot of that.
No.
And in the wind world, you guys are pretty lucky that your history is still pretty fresh.
Yes.
So the glass ceilings aren't there to be broken.
Right. That's right.
I mean, there was Sousa, and then just anybody could do whatever they wanted.
That seems like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
I mean, we get people like Jennifer Higdon coming onto the scene, pretty much unabated in the wind band world, because a woman writing music for band was not a new concept.
Right. That's right. That's a good point.
Who's Holst's daughter?
Imogen
Holst was conducting works of her father and writing music of her own, particularly for wind ensemble.
Yes. It's always been seen as sort of, for some reason, wind instruments have always been seen as somehow modern, right, compared to any kind of ensemble devoted to strings. And I'm not quite sure why. There's probably lots of reasons why, but it's always seemed odd to me. but you're right. In the grand scheme of history, the emphasis the spotlight has been on large orchestras, and the best stuff that we get in the wind world from before, I don't know, the 20th century really were like Mozart serenades. And but you're right, going back to what you're saying, that Mozart serenades are not super accessible to most high school programs. But there are.
That's a chamber thing that maybe you take the solo ensemble contest.
Right.
But it's not something you're going to do with your whole band.
Right. That's true. But that has been. I mean, you're right. That's a in some ways a positive that in the 20th century, school band is a new phenomenon starting in the middle of the 20th century or earlier part of that. And so our library of music just blossomed. But that also restricts us because I still need to teach my students about earlier musical eras. And so we just don't have literature that goes along with that. And I would imagine, I don't know this, but I would imagine that as an orchestra teacher, your problem, if you want to call it that, might be a little bit the reverse.
Precisely. Because bands are newer and more popular, and it goes back to, Western Union could get you a trumpet for real cheap, real quick, and it wouldn't break en route like a violin would get smashed, is that we have like 1,000 times more bands than we do orchestras in public schools in this country.
That's true. And yet, just a side note, we don't have very many professional bands, right? Just professional orchestras. But that we can save that for another day.
Yeah, I usually throw that in as a jab if I have to defend.
That's right. And it is a worthy defense.
But the reality is for those of us who are in the academic, teaching part of orchestra, is that the people making money writing music right now are writing music for school bands.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a couple of composers, and many of them said that their publishers frequently tell them if you would just start writing for band, you could add a 0 to your paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the people who do write music for school orchestras are band people, and they've kind of gotten lucky when they write an idiomatic piece. But if you look outside of like the top 10 hits that we have that are by those band people, is it doesn't really work. I mean, they're not easy pieces, and maybe they're in D major, which is what they have going for them.
Right.
But outside of those top 10 sellers, the music by these people is not always the most accessible for string players.
Yeah.
And the music that is written by string players or arranged by string players, like Sandra Dachau and Deborah Baker Monday and Bob Phillips. Bob Phillips might be a band guy originally. I might be confused.
That name doesn't ring familiar to me.
But anyhow, the arrangements that they do of symphonic works, which is always something that excites me, because if I can make it palatable for my students and try and just get you a window into the symphonic world, then maybe we can graduate you to youth symphony or college orchestra, where you can say, well, I've played Capriccio Espagnol before. It was just the Sandra Dachau version.
Right.
But she maintains what was idiomatically approachable about that piece, and managed to present a piece that actually achieved some kind of technical goal.
Yeah.
And that's something that you guys in the band world are always having, especially when you get these flex band things.
Right.
That we don't have that. We have violin 3 sometimes for those of us that are lacking in violas. That's not a problem that I have. Sometimes I have too many violas.
Nice.
But having new music that achieves some kind of purpose. Because at least when I was in high school, it was still, and I love this music, so I'm not trying to downplay it at all, but like the Tchaikovsky Serenade for Strings, at that point in time, at Capitol High School in Olympia, we could do the first movement of the Tchaikovsky Serenade of Strings. We couldn't do the whole piece all in one concert. And that was great.
Yeah.
And it does very specifically develop a couple of skills, getting around the instrument and counting and playing with each other. But so many of the newer works being written for learning wind ensembles are very particular in what they're trying to teach in that piece. It's a march, and so everybody kind of has this 6/8 thing with eighth rest, eighth, and on repeat, to teach that feel, and maybe there's a fun trumpet solo for your trumpet kid.
Yeah.
And in the orchestra world, it's maybe we've got a small handful of those. There's not 10 new ones every year.
So do you find that in the orchestra world, for instance, middle school or high school orchestras, the music that's written for that, is it specifically that the composers are thinking more performance-based, like they're writing, for a professional symphony, but junior, and so they're less worried about a skill to be taught than they are about the overall effect of the piece? Or is it just
Well, that's a complicated question to answer, but I'll tell you this, that pretty much everything I buy is always a little bit too easy or a little bit too hard.
I feel the same. Yes.
Yeah, and that's a problem that that isn't unique to orchestra. But something that doesn't exist because there just isn't as much music being written for strings is a publisher like Chose or FJH uh, really thinking about the catalog of music they're presenting for a given school year, and thinking about in the fall for seventh grade, maybe we need to introduce third position, and let's do it for everybody. Let's not just the first violins get third position. Everybody is shifting, and there is a piece called Night Shift by Richard Meyer that does that, but I'd like something that isn't Night Shift and isn't by Richard Meyer, because I've got kids with 2 or 3 older brothers that have been through the program and have played that one already.
Right.
And while there are tunes like the string arrangement of Hoedown that I think everybody wants to play at some point, there are songs that maybe we retire for a couple of cycles and then bring back, because the parents of those 4 kids that have all gone through the program, they've already heard Night Shift 3 times.
So this is really interesting to me because it really does feel like, I mean, based on just what you and I are saying, that our issue, we sort of have complexes that are reversed. So a band director's complex from the time of, I don't know if you know the name Fred Fennell, in the 1940s and 50s, right? He kind of started this idea of a selective wind ensemble as opposed to these enormous, University of Michigan symphonic bands, right? These huge things. So the 20th century for band directors was a story of being jealous of orchestras. Basically saying, no one's taking us seriously. Everyone thinks we're just Sousa. And we, darn it, we're going to have serious music written for us. And so Fred Fennell, Don Hunsberger, all these wind legends that we have now from the 20th century all got together and decided that they're going to do a big push for commissioning what they call, what we might call serious repertoire for wind ensembles. And then from wind ensembles, we break up and we have more chamber ensembles, and we can do Varese. And we sort of carved out a niche for ourselves that was art music as opposed to educational music, as if they needed to be mutually exclusive. But in the 20th century, I think that we got that a lot, that it was either going to be for education reasons or it was going to be for artistic reasons.
Well, and more recently in the 21st century, the recently departed David Maslanka, I think, corrected a couple of the mistakes. One of them, the primary mistake of writing for wind ensemble that I hear as an orchestra person, is that the clarinets are not the replacement for the string section. Clarinet is a solo instrument. You put too many together, and no matter how good they are, they never quite blend. And Maslanka looked at the different instruments as stops on an organ.
Yep.
And really, bands should have compared themselves to an organ, because you're moving wind, and you have different stops that have a different aperture, that make a different tone color, tone quality, with a different attack, a different articulation, each of them. And so when you listen to his symphonies, it's almost like you're listening to one of these French symphonic organs, like the Cavaillé-Coll organs that were meant to impersonate symphonies, but really they sound more like a really top-notch wind ensemble.
Yep.
And so when you register music for a wind ensemble the way that you would for an organ, I think everybody is better served, and then you don't have 18 clarinet players playing a solo line together, and it sounds like 18 soloists trying to play
Right. It doesn't. You're exactly right. It doesn't work. And so and when you have these huge orchestral transcriptions for a big band, what you end up needing then, if you have 18 clarinets, you have to have at least that many trumpets, if not more. You have to have double that number of flutes, because what flutes do, the effect that flutes have in a band is that, well, they can be soloistic, but they also soften the sound of the clarinet. They soften the whole band. So when you have that many clarinets to be the string section, you just have to multiply everything. And what kind of music can you play with that? Not very good music anyways.
Well, and if you have that many clarinet players, but you don't have any bassoon players, or you don't have an oboe player,
or horns,
or horns, like you have 18 trumpet players but no horns,
right?
You know, at least 3 of those trumpet players could be figuring out horn.
That's right.
And you could have a more balanced section.
That's right.
Because of that sort of organ registration mentality.
Yeah, some of my favorite times as a band's person, being a trumpeter in a band, was playing Bach transcriptions.
And those work much better for band than they do for string orchestra.
Yeah, they do. Yes.
Because when you're looking at the score and you're not thinking about it as an organist, you just see 3 lines, and that's the sort of as a person approaching Bach to arrange it. That's sort of the first perspective that you have, but you've got to consider going back and forth between manuals and the different, divisions of the organ, the swell, the grate, and the positif, and the pedal, and divide it up that way. And in a band, there are more places to divide it than in strings, especially if you have a smaller program of just 30 kids with, 2 violins, viola, cello, bass. You can go divisi and do, inside, outside on each of those parts, but there's a chance that you have an odd numbered section, and now you're going to have somebody who, well, do you play the bottom or do you play the top? And that's a 3-hour discussion we can have another time.
But you're right. I just want to bring it back to Mislanka because he was really a genius, and he was able to meld those 2 things, the educational aspect and the artistic aspect. And he wrote so much music that and if I could do a Mislanka piece on every concert, I probably would, just because his music allows me to program in a unique way. Like I don't think he ever wrote anything called overture. Maybe he did, but that's going back to band complexes. Like competition, our history of competition has just really kind of
overture, slow piece, march.
Right. It's really riddled our rep in a bad way, and a lot of people really uphold competitions as ways of improving our bands, and that's true, and orchestras.
And that brings it back to the point about critique that we were talking about.
Right.
Is when you get the critics, and all of them are saying how bad Beethoven 5 is, because the job of a critic is to tell you what's wrong.
Right.
Is to point out the negativity on purpose, to single out, isolate what's wrong.
Right.
And I don't think that's a way that we serve our students.
No, and that's also driven
to recovery, or the path to to fix it.
Right.
If the problem is there, we can't deny that. But to give them a route to success rather than just these are all the things you did wrong.
Right. And it is, I don't need to tell you or any of your listeners, but it is the reason why in the orchestra world there's a deficit of varied repertoire, and it's the reason for it's the same thing for band. We have a lot of good stuff we can play from the 20th century, but we also have a lot of really bad stuff, and it's because bands needed a march to play right, and so we don't have to go too much into it, but I do think it's a big problem for our ensembles, and it's a big problem for large publishing companies and small publishing companies, because they get into this cycle of they just have to populate their libraries with a very specific type of educational music. And
and there's it's a recent trend in the band world that I admire, and I've been trying to cultivate and stir up within the strings community, is finding a grad student or a professional and getting together with like 10 or 12 different schools to pay a small fee each to get a commission as a group from a composer.
A consortium.
And to have it tailor-made to we're going to go to Jennifer Higdon, and even though she writes this really crazy symphonic stuff that is richly orchestrated and it's so stinking hard, we're going to say, hey, we've got 50 groups involved, signed up. We'll each pay you $120 each. You do the math.
Hmm.
For a grade 2 slow piece.
Hmm.
Programmatically, it's up to you, but we need something slower for our students. And this is kind of generally, the issues that we have, and these are some of the ranges that we're working with. And here's the money,
Hmm.
and making the piece that you need.
Yeah.
By asking, rather than
Yeah.
trying to look through all the swearing or whatever, however you
Right.
pronounce that guy's name.
Swearingen, yeah.
Yeah, every time I go to a band contest, it's like his name up and down, and I'm just like,
I feel like I need to put a disclaimer up for any of my band friends that watch. Nothing's wrong with James Swearingen, but
he wrote
hey,
some good tunes. They learn well. They sound good.
He is prolific, but you're absolutely right that we, first of all, representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, why do we need music that's already been written? So we need new music.
And realistically, does that particular tune that you've picked out, that you've done for the last 15 years, does it perfectly suit the group that you have today?
I guarantee that it doesn't. Yeah.
When we could, as a group, reach out and sort of determine, everybody this year is kind of having a hard time giving the oboes enough playing time so that they get better at their instrument and that they begin to develop a good sound, but not too much is asked of them. So let's go out and let's find a grad student at Michigan, and even we got 50 people, I'll give you $50. I guarantee you,
Oh, someone would be into that. Yeah.
They would do it, and they would write you exactly the piece you need. And maybe you don't play it again for another 10 years or so, but that frees us up to do that kind of thing more often, which increases the repertoire. So and 20 years down the road, you have exactly the same problem that you had again, where you've got oboe players that have weak tone and they feel overly challenged by the tunes that they've got, and you bring that one back out again.
Yeah, right. And so what you just described, that commissioning consortium, is the story of bands for the last 70 years. That's our history. And so it's absolutely doable for orchestras. I can't imagine why not. Jennifer Higdon wrote a piece for a series called Band Quest, and her piece is called Rhythm Stand, and it's for young bands. And it's where they tap their pencils on their stands, and it's Jennifer Higdon, so like, she would of course say this is not her best piece, and no one would say it is, but it's her, and why wouldn't you want a piece by Jennifer Higdon on your program? So I am absolutely sure that is a possibility, and I will.
And for a composer, it's a bigger challenge.
It is a bigger challenge, and it's a risk. Jennifer Higdon took a big risk to write for wind ensembles in general. Whether she writes for top level wind ensembles, which she's going to, and also top level orchestras. I mean, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a risk that she takes, because this is again the band complex. But when composers decide to go down the band rabbit hole, yes, there's money involved, but that's money just right now, and they might be branded a band composer, right? And so. Yeah, I mean, so the same issue is probably your issue too when you're talking about school orchestra.
Issue from the orchestra side, because there is a lot out there, but a lot of it is like owned by these rental companies.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
that don't want to give it to you for whatever reason. They don't want to let you play this music.
They want it to be exclusive. They already have the rights, so they want it to be exclusive. Yeah.
And I think this consortium commissioning makes or gives us access to these composers that would otherwise be behind an insurmountable paywall.
Yep.
There are pieces by Edgar Meyer and Philip Glass that are still not in production because either a performer has exclusive rights, and it's not the composer didn't make this decision. It's the publisher or their artist management team or something.
Right.
As an amateur, emphasis on amateur composer myself, I want my music played. I want it to be, I want to hear it and have other people hopefully learn something by playing it.
Right.
Not just locked up by Boozy and Hawks, never to be heard from again.
Yeah, it's a big problem that I think institutions, ensembles at every single level are dealing with, and I think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see a change with that.
Well, especially during this pandemic. I mean, the Oxford University Press and Boozy and Hawks, are they making very much money right now?
They got to figure out a way, right?
They are going to have to open the floodgates and let us buy Candide.
Yep.
Like, why can't I just buy Candide?
Right.
I mean, Leonard Bernstein was an American composer, and a British company tells me that I can't play his music, or Copland's, or Gershwin's.
Right, it's a big problem. Yeah, yeah, but I think their time is coming up because there's just enough demand now that something has to change. But
well, and there is, however, a small caveat. There is a place for editors and orchestrators. So, like, music that's been written by Fanny Mendelssohn, but never, fully orchestrated, or it was just a score and we needed parts made. Those people absolutely deserve to be paid for their efforts.
Yes.
But it shouldn't be kept in, a locked safe in Ireland or something. I mean, it should be available to everybody, and that person should still get paid, but not the, that you can have it on the 1st of March, but we must have it back by June.
Right. That's an excellent
$200 for every page you lose.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, as a grad student, one of my jobs was always to unpack and repack rental parts, and the amount of erasing that I had to do, and just all the stipulations involved in rental scores. It's huge. So yeah. So I fully support the commissioning idea, and you never know, it may not be completely unique. There may be some other high school orchestra director across the country that desperately needs to start the same thing. So it's worth a forum.
Exactly. I mean, I can't be the only one having the problem that I'm having. Whatever the problem may be. Like, you've got 11 bass players, but all of them played a different instrument within the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how can we give them music where they play more than they rest?
Well, and that you feel like is a nice artistic statement, even for a 6-minute long piece, right? And that's something that orchestras and bands are lacking. So that's something that we need to continue to knock on composers' doors about. That look, how about you just write something, make it accessible for my players, and we'll play it. And there doesn't need to be much more around it than that. Right?
Well, and we don't get to Mazanka 4 if we don't have the, Swearinger tunes.
Well, exactly.
Or an equivalent.
Right. But I will say also, again, going back to this idea of, well, like this band quest thing that I they may have some orchestral pieces now, and you should look into it. But there are some really good composers that have written really basic pieces, and I will always do those. I do those at the collegiate level if I needed to, because I know that there's good music behind it, and so it's a matter of, like you said, identifying the composers, and then what's the worst they could say is no. You could ask them, can we do this?
And furthermore, trying to get more representation of people of color is, like, I've said this a couple of times now on the show. I was looking for an arrangement of "Lift Every Voice," the referred to as the Black National Anthem, but the only one out there was arranged by a white man.
Yeah,
and it's a good arrangement. There's nothing wrong, and it was, of course, it was many years ago that it was made. And I was just sort of going through my Facebook feed asking for help of, hey, how do I get an arrangement of this piece that works for my kids? Because there are composers like George Walker that wrote fantastic music, but quite difficult music, very difficult music. How do I get the music that I need while representing composers of color? And the answer was profoundly, just ask.
Commission, yep.
And I can't always bear the load on my own, but if we all just kind of decide that this is the route we want to take, I think this consortium commissioning can not only get us the music that we need to serve our kids, but to expand the library to a point where we as a community feel a little bit better about the way that we are representing the whole community of music globally.
Yep. Well, it sounds like we need to start a committee, and I will be happy to serve on it.
Well, I've always wanted to bang a gavel. Well, anyhow, I think we're approaching sufficiency here.
Okay.
But I've got a couple of questions that I ask of all my guests before we finish.
Okay.
The primary being, if you could think of a time in your musical career where you were struggling or going through a hard time or just questioning life in general, what advice could you go back in time and give yourself that may have helped you avoid a mistake or have better dealt with hard news or something like that? What sort of advice would you have for your past self in a moment of hardship?
Jeez. I feel like I've thought about this a lot lately because I've had so much time to think. I'm thinking back on my very first job, which was, so I graduated and then had this idea that I would become a high school band director and win the Sudler Flag of Honor and the Sousa Association and be inducted into the American Band Association and, all those things. And the first job I got was I followed my wife. She's a choral director, and she got a high school job out in Maryland. And then and I was blessed with a teaching job in a neighboring county, and it was a beginning band and orchestra job. So they start in 4th grade out there in Maryland. And so here I am, of course I did all my educational methods and pedagogy classes, but not at all conducting, so to speak, not at all edifying in any kind of artistic way for myself, right? And also just my pride was hurt probably. And so I think though that I would go back and tell myself what I try to tell myself continually now when I have a bad day, which is let everything distill and focus around the music that you're making. And because it doesn't have to be intricate or difficult, but it does have to be music. Mm-hmm. And also serve your students. And I think I did both of those things, but I did it while worrying a lot. and I think that if I had the benefit of hindsight, I would have just relaxed, realized this is not probably where I'll end my career. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to feel sad for myself. And also, this is really great. I mean, looking back on it, I really loved that time because I was surrounded by students who genuinely wanted to be there and loved the idea of making music. And I think since that time, I've been trying to surround myself with students who also want to be there, which is probably why I'm at the college level now. It's because at some point I had this idea that, well, if you teach college ensembles, everyone's going to want to be there. and in 20 years, I'll probably have to look back on this time and say, no, it's.
But if there wasn't somebody compassionate and caring and, knowledgeable enough about music with good musicianship to teach those students when they were beginners,
that's right.
Have anybody.
That's right. And so, that's the realization I came to as I was working out my existential crisis, is that no, these beginners need a musician to lead them. Mm-hmm. And how else are they going to know what it's supposed to look like, right? So by the end, I mean, I had a lot of colleagues who were not really conducting their beginning band, and I understand why, but I made the choice too. And so when they went up to middle school, they knew how to follow a conductor, and just stuff like that. And I think it's important for us all to realize that whatever we can bring to any situation is what we should bring, and that you don't have to try to fit any type of mold in whatever job you have. And I would have saved myself a lot of strife at my first year teaching if I could have told myself that.
That's, that brings it right back to like the most distilled experience of what it means to teach the student in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that when we're fresh out of college, what we expect is the same ensemble that we were in college is
Yep.
what we want.
Yep.
And that's what we think we've earned or what we deserve. But there's this whole other preparation that has to happen before that's possible.
That's right.
All do better to honor and support and maybe encourage people looking to be elementary music teachers, especially elementary general music teachers. That every child, regardless of whether or not they want to go into an ensemble classroom, is served by music, and we in the ensemble setting are best served when we have, you know, high level talented musicians training K through 2 students in steady beat and melody and harmony.
That's right, and that goes back to at the collegiate level, we have to build the best musicians that we can. And at the high school level, leading to college, we have to build the best musicians that we can, knowing that they're going to teach beginning music, right?
And not seeing that teaching beginning music as some kind of cop-out for not being able to pass some competencies.
It's a place of honor.
We should have more investment in the people that are going to teach the beginners.
That's right. It's a place of honor.
The most important job. Yep. What we do is, I mean, the logistical things that we get to do are pretty stressful and challenging. But on the musical side of things, if the students are well prepared, we can just rehearse. We don't have to deal with holding your instrument or embouchure or, I mean,
and that starts at the beginning.
About those things, we have to reinforce them from.
Yeah, but that starts at the beginning. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can tell what kind of general music and beginning band and orchestra students have had when you walk up to a symphony orchestra and you give the first downbeat. The response that you get will tell you exactly what kind of elementary music experience they had. Just that first sound.
Yep. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. I've got a few more questions off camera, but thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to put you in touch with our band teacher here at the high school.
Please do, and
your help and advice.
Thank you.
And that's the only way we're all going to survive this thing is helping each other out. So
that's
thank
exactly
you for
right.
coming on the show, and thank you to everybody watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.